Welcome to the internet layer of the dark world of optics. All jokes aside, I'm a nerdy guy who writes about guns and works with optics. I strive to provide a thinking man's take on both whenever I can. The topic of the conversation for today is a new rifle scope from a company called SAI, S-A-I, called SAI 6. It comes to us from the creators of the Tangent Theta brand, from a company called Armament Technologies. The rifle scope is manufactured in Japan with their input, so it is related to some other scopes out there, but a little bit different. The closest direct competitor for it, I believe, is 6 hours Tango 6T 126x24, which is also a front focal plane low power variable design that happens to have a 3-type BDC reticle. Here's a quick look through the scope for a few minutes, and then I'm going to give you a few more snapshots and add a little bit more detail. The first image you're looking at is a target plate at 50 yards. The scope is on 6 power. One of the more unusual things about this scope is the reticle, which is why I'm starting out with a through the scope video. Notice how the edged reticle, the black lines, are pretty prominent and fairly nicely visible. Now we're looking above the berm at the range where I was at the time. I apologize for the shakiness of the tripod. I forgot the studio tripod at home, so this was a flimsy one. The bushes and the vegetation I'm looking at are about 100-150 yards away, approximately. It was not the clearest day, but so optical quality, don't judge it from this. Optical quality of the scope is quite good. What I really wanted to look at was the depth of field. Now we're going back in magnification. The way the magnification ring is marked, it's 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.5, and 1. So I'm going in steps that are marked on the magnification ring. You can see just below the reticle is the 50-yard plate we were looking at originally, and also have a paper target at 25 yards. And we are going to look at both as we go along. Okay. At 25 yards on 1 power, the reticle, even without illumination, is actually pretty easy to see. But illumination on definitely helps. Illumination as it is not what I would call day bright. I mean, you can see it here, but the target is in the shade. It was a little bit later in the day, so the sun was already beginning to set. But it is the illumination is day visible. I think during the bright day, the primary rapid aiming feature, that's basically those 4 diagonal bullet-shaped features that are not illuminated, but they're very, very prominent, and they draw your eye to the center of the reticle quite nicely, and the 3 thick bars also help. The illuminated portion of the reticle, thankfully, they didn't illuminate the whole thing, which I like. It basically forms an 18 milliradian cross. As you go down in illumination levels, once you get to about 3, can't really, there are 9 illumination levels. Once you get to 3, 2, and 1, can't really see them. Here I covered my the objective with my hand, and this was a low illumination, low power illumination. You really couldn't see it, so it should be night vision compatible, but I will test that when I have a chance. The illumination back on, now we are on 6 power, where it's pretty prominent. But even on low magnification, honestly, I like the way this reticle looks, the way the different features are sized and things like that. It makes it pretty easy to pick out, and arguably easier when you're looking through the scope than when you're looking at a video. The scope is really, really easy to get behind, especially on 1 power, more so than the specs necessarily would suggest. I do know that the engineers at Tangent Theta and Armament had a good amount of input into the optical design, and this eyepiece is very, very forgiving. This is one of the better variants of the design that I've seen. One of the simple litmus tests is that how long does it take for me to line a camera up behind the scope. This was one of the easiest that I have seen to date. Aside from the rapid aiming feature business, the way this reticle is designed, it has a combination of milliradian holds and a BDC. On the horizontal axis, there's a primary small aiming cross. I'm going to point at the blue sky so that you can see the reticle a little bit more easily. There's a small aiming cross, which I happen to like. It's nice to be able to dissect the target. I'm comfortable with a floating cross or a floating dot. And then there is a little bit of empty space around it. On the left and right, it's a milliradian. And then there are 1 milliradian hash marks. If you look carefully at the aiming tree, the elevation holds are clearly a BDC, although it's an interesting hybrid BDC, which I'll talk about in a moment. But the wind holds are in milliradian, which I kind of like, because for most of my cartridges, because I'm so used to milliradian reticles, I tend to think of my holds in milliradian, not an actual wind speed. That for me will be fairly easy to translate to this design. The holdovers themselves are a little bit, well, they're not quite unique, because these are the same holdovers that I used on the Alcan Spectre DR rifle scope. Notice that the first holdover mark is 300 meters. This is a Canadian scope, so it's in meters. 300 meters, 400, 500, 600. Notice that the step from 500 to 600 is actually bigger from 600 to 700. The reason for that is that the holds, the ballistic compensation switches out to 600. It's designed for 62 grain NATO ammo, basically, out of a 16-inch or 14.5, I think 16-inch barrel. I'll get the exact drawing for the reticle and double check everything. 700 and 800 holds are for a longer barrel weapon that has a higher velocity. For example, if you use the same scope issued on an M4 type carbine and on a 56 machine gun that has a longer barrel, 700 and 800 longer distance stuff is more likely to be used with a longer barrel weapon. So it's an interesting take on things. For me personally, honestly, I don't terribly care. I'll figure out the exact holds, and I did a snapshot of it. I'll show you in a moment. I'll figure out the exact holds and adapt it to the specific ammo I use. When I shoot a little bit further away, I tend to use 77 grain ammo. So we need to figure out what these holds mean for Mark II 62 clones or things like that. Okay. On the bottom left, notice there's a chokestyle rangefinder, which is fairly explanatory, but I've got a couple of snapshots, one of the documents. And this basically gives you an idea of what the different reticle elements are: ballistic correction, wind, vertical chokestyle rangefinder, and the rapid aiming feature. Since I don't have an exact drawing yet, here's a look into my collimator, where the scale was in milliradian. The rapid aiming feature itself is not really a brand new thing. I give it to my brother, but he still uses it. An older Alcan Atos 3X scope. That was the first implementation I have seen of this type of rapid aiming feature, with 4 bullet-shaped objects pointing toward the center of the reticle, coming in a little bit of a diagonal way. The idea behind this method is to provide something that's easy to see, that draws your eye to the center, but obscures less of your field of view and blocks less of potential bullet impact than a circle or a horseshoe would. And it seems to work pretty well, actually, now that I've had a little bit of time with it. I kind of like the way it works, and I like the way it looks. The rangefinder on the bottom left of the image, like I said, it is fairly explanatory. You take a 30-inch or 76 centimeter target, see where that fits, and that gives you a distance that you can hold. In this case, it shows half of the human length human height is about 30 inches, and it measures out to be 300 meters, and then there is a 300-meter hold using the reticle, and naturally if it's 4, 5, 6, 8, whatever, I mean, you'd be using the corresponding hold on the reticle. Aside from that chokestyle rangefinder, at closer distances you can do quick range estimation, definitely good enough for center of mass hits and probably adequately accurate, where the rapid aiming features can be used to figure out where the object is. For example, at 25 meters, approximate width of the human chest is the space between the two horizontal thick bars. I can make a pretty good argument that I'm not hugely concerned about range finding at 25 meters. That's basically point blank range, but it's not necessarily a bad thing to have. The rest of the rapid aiming features are also sized to give you a fairly quick range estimation at closer distances, basically closer than a chokestyle rangefinder will take you. For example, at the picture on the left is a human-sized target, let's say 18 inches wide, at 100 meters, and that is almost exactly the space between the bullet shape rapid aiming features, while at 50 meters, which is the image on the right, it's going to be going about halfway there. Or if you're looking for a headshot, if you take a closer look, you will notice that the typical width of a human head is roughly half of the width of human shoulders. So at 50 meters, a human head will fit very neatly in between those rapid aiming features, and you can let off a comparatively well-aimed shot. Purely hypothetically, of course. Right? And that's largely it on the reticle. I did a little bit of shooting with the scope, not enough to have any sort of a final judgment, but so far, like what I see, optically it's quite good. Depth of field is very good. The scope is exceedingly easy to get behind. The reticle is a little bit different, but to me it looks very usable. That having been said, I have a good amount of mileage with the earlier Alcan 3X that has a roughly similar design, at least as far as those rapid aiming features are concerned. And so it's not an entirely new thing for me. But still, it's a nice and easy scope to use. I have a couple of different 1:6 by 24 Japanese scopes here. One of them is the SIG Tango 60 that I mentioned, which I think is a really direct competitor to this guy. Optomechanically, they look pretty close. I'll take a closer look as well. The way the reticle is designed is different, so my next video on the subject will probably look at the two reticles side by side so we can do a nice comparison. I also have a second focal plane, Delta Striker 1:6 by 24, which is once again a very different reticle design. But optically and mechanically, it may very well be related. It's they all the parts go through the same OEM. Delta Striker and the SAI 6 are both made in Japan, while SIG Tango 60 is assembled in the US, but I suspect most of the parts come from that same OEM in Japan. So these designs may very well be related. All three are easy to get behind. With front focal plane designs, it's a little bit harder to make the eyepiece truly disappear when you are looking through it. Very few scopes pull it off. But these two, the Tango 60 and the SAI, do it quite well. The Striker 1:6, kind of like a Vortex Razor Gen 2, which I'm quite well familiar with, the eyepiece almost disappears into a thin line. It's one of the things I like about the design. But I will say that the front focal plane versions here, and I also have a front focal plane Razor Gen 3, all three of these are really easy to get behind on one power. I think the core design is very solid. I think the eyepiece design is very good. I think the Vortex Razor Gen 2 and Gen 3 are a little bit faster in this regard from what I've seen so far, but I'll do some more testing side by side. And the SIG and the SAI 6, to put it mildly, not giving up much. If anything at all, I'll pull out my shot timer and see if I can try to quantify it, but I may not necessarily be the best test subject to do that. I'll continue spending time with the scope, do some shooting with it, and I will let you know how it goes. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you need to get a hold of me, darklordofoptics.com is probably your best bet, but ask questions in comments or send me a message, and I'll do my best to help if I can. Thank you.